Hey there, fans of Murder and Mayhem! Welcome back to Frybox64 Productions. I'm your hostess with the mostest, Frybox64, and we're bringing you a brand new, it's not really a series, but it's more like a collection of series. So we're going to take all of my reviews that I do, thoughts from the couch, movie reviews, game reviews, app reviews, all that kind of stuff, and we're going to throw it into what I'm going to call May I Recommend Mondays. So this is going to be our one of our thoughts from the couch episodes, and today we're going to be reviewing the horror book House of Windows by John Langan. And this one I really actually liked. I was going to read another book of his for the Halloween challenge that I was doing, but I unfortunately didn't finish it in time before I had to give it back to the library. So but luckily I got another book that was written by him, and I got the chance to read that, and now we're going to give that a little bit of a review. So, without further ado, let's get into it. So House of Windows is basically about a woman who is recounting her story to he's not really a journalist, he's more like a horror story writer who writes like little short stories for a magazine or a newspaper or something like that. And he has heard about this this scandal almost, or a couple of scandals that this lady has been involved with. So we focus on Veronica, I forget her last name, Veronica Crowley, I think, who is the 26-year-old wife of 61 or 62-year-old English professor Roger Crowley, I think his last name is. And she's recounting her story of her husband's disappearance to this newspaper article journalist guy. I'm doing a great job with this. And the whole thing was she's been involved in not one but two scandals. The first one was when she wound up having an affair with her professor, with Roger, when she was going through college. And that affair led to him divorcing his wife when she found out about it, and then marrying her because she was pregnant with his kid. And the big thing and then the second big scandal that happened, a couple years after they got married, he disappeared. And everybody thought that she murdered him, but what actually happened to him was so supernatural and so strange and so just doesn't happen in everyday life that she doesn't think anybody's gonna believe the actual story, so she just lets everybody think that he disappeared. The book basically is her telling the story of what happened to her husband and the events leading up to it. So she gives us a bit of backstory about having her affair with Roger and the wife finding out and them getting married and everything. And then we get introduced to Ted, the son of Roger, who was about the same age as Veronica almost. And Ted has had a very strained relationship with his dad. Like, they started out like inseparable father-son when he was a little boy and everything, but over time he became the sulky teenager, and then the adult that just wanted to have nothing to do with his dad, and they had a falling out, and he didn't talk to him after he joined the military. So fast forward to the night of the wedding, that Ted has not talked with his dad for at least a couple of years while he's in the military, and Veronica decides to send him an invite to the wedding, being like, yeah, so we got married, just want to let you know, kind of thing. And Ted flips out, shows up at their apartment, and gets into a fist fight with Roger. The result of which is them getting thrown into jail overnight, and then Veronica coming to bail them out the next morning. And as they're going to their cars in the parking lot, Roger disowns Ted. But he doesn't just disown him, he cobbles together this almost like Charles Dickens level, like ghost of future Christmas past, ghost of Christmas future and whatnot level curse that he practically puts on this kid. Like, let our blood no longer be connected, let us no longer see each other as father and son, you are no longer my son, I disown you, like it's just horrible. And then the worst part is, shortly after that, this is set in the time period right before 9/11, and the terrorist attacks happen, and he's not at the Twin Towers, or he's not like on the flight that gets like downed before it hits the Pentagon, but he is part of special forces that are sent into Afghanistan afterwards to try to find the terrorists, and he winds up getting literally blown to bits in an explosion while he's over there. And so then after that, Roger just falls apart. Ted was his only child, so he no longer has children. His original wife has left him. All that he's got now is the house that they all lived in when Ted was still alive. And so originally he and Veronica were living in her apartment, and then they moved into the actual like house that he and his previous wife owned before he got divorced. And so they start fixing the place up, they start moving in, it's great, happy times, and then right around this point in time, Veronica miscarries their baby, and she starts having visions of the house and of all these like horrifying like demonic visions almost of Roger like pronouncing his curse. So she's starting to think, well, maybe there's something to do with that. She's starting to think maybe there's a connection between that whole like disowning of the son and the miscarriage happening. And at first she thinks, okay, maybe it's just stress. But then there's other supernatural things that happen in the house from day to day. Like she sees shadow people like walking around the house. She sees like scenes from the past. She goes past windows and they're freezing cold. And they start thinking, well, maybe it's Ted reaching out, trying to connect with them. And Roger just like his career plummets. He gets like put on like leave of absence from the university, and he barricades himself in his study and starts putting together this model of the area of the location where Ted died. And I don't mean like just puts up a little diorama and that's it. No, he like gets maps of like trade maps. He gets like actual like star maps. He gets like little historical like maps of like what it looked like before the present day. Like just covers the study with maps. He goes and buys soil that apparently is from that specific spot where Ted died. He gets like these little miniature like painted figurines that probably Gunter from Mini Mishaps could have probably painted of those like specific soldiers that look exactly like Ted and his like squad mates and everything, and he recreates the entire scene detail for detail in the middle of the study, of his big table in the study. And he won't go talk to anybody, like therapists or anything. He won't talk to anybody, not even Veronica. He won't even confide in her what is going on, what he's doing, or like the real reason for why he's doing this. And Veronica, in the meantime, is doing all of this research into the house, thinking, well, maybe the house itself is haunted. Maybe that's why she's seeing all these ghosts and things. And she turns out, like, she comes up with some history of the house. There was an artist that lived there that did some paintings that looked kind of close to what she's been seeing, but not 100%. And this artist was in touch with another colleague, another artist, who practiced something called, I want to say I'm pronouncing this right, locomancy. And apparently locomancy is the magic, like place magic, like location magic. And the whole thought process beyond that, she learns through her research, is there is like inherent magic or inherent like energy in buildings, in the ground, in locations, in like nature and all that stuff. And if you do the right ritual, then you can bring that place to life. And if a city gets big enough, then it has like its own spirit, like it becomes sentient. And the set of paintings that this guy did were about like displaying all the different all the different forms or avatars that a city could take on once it became sentient. And so that kind of all starts tying together. So Veronica's starting to think, well, maybe Roger's doing trying to do this like locomancy stuff where he's trying to bring like that place magic back to life, and maybe it's affecting the house because the house has had some history with that. And she's kind of starting to piece it all together, and that's when Roger starts sleepwalking and walking around and like visiting Ted's room and visiting like other locations around the house that were important to him. And Veronica is getting more and more disturbed by the things that he's saying, the things that he's doing. He starts talking about the words that he said to Ted to disown him and everything. And she goes, okay, this isn't good. I need a good night's sleep. She's got a teaching job now at this point. And she's like, I need to be able to sleep. I need to be able to function properly if I'm going to teach my classes. She goes, why don't we take a vacation away from the house? We've got the money. Like, he's freaking loaded. Like, they don't even really need to teach that much. Like, they are just loaded. And she's like, why don't we take a vacation, go to Martha's Vineyard? Why don't we go get away from the house a little bit, and we'll see if this helps your sleepwalking. We go and take a vacation at a bed and breakfast, and at first it's fine. But while his sleepwalking ends and doesn't continue, her experiences get worse. And the worst thing is like she keeps seeing little shadows like on the carousel that she's riding on. Like at one point she gets on a carousel, and I never felt so connected to a character in my entire life as I did right then when Veronica was talking about her love of carousels, because I love merry-go-rounds and carousels so much. They're my favorite thing to see when you go to like an amusement park. But like she saw things while she was riding the carousel, she saw things while they were going through the different shops, and then it all culminates in her being like when she goes to a restaurant with Roger, the server that comes and like drops off her tea, when she looks up at him, first she sees the waiter, and then she sees Ted in his true spiritual form. And apparently, it's very Lovecraftian. Like, he's got like this stretched out skin, his eyes are like held open and look like they're made of glass, and he's got like barbed wire and like chunks of flesh like missing from the explosion and everything. And she doesn't go into too much detail because she only like sees him for like a split second, but it's enough to just drive her nuts. And she starts screaming and kicking at the server, and then just runs off, and she goes like running off by herself. And she winds up going to this really foggy like pavilion that people would use. I think they used it for, oh gosh, it was like some sort of like religious like pavilion where they would have like picnics and meetings and stuff like that. So she sits there like on the little like she sits there in the pavilion, and then she has a vision of what happened in the cell when Roger and Ted got arrested for fighting. While Ted is asleep in his cell, Roger is having a heart attack in his cell, like a literal heart attack. And he's sitting there and he's trying to come up with just this very verbally abusive way that he can get back at Ted for attacking him and for verbally attacking his new wife and everything. And he's like refusing to ask for help. He's refusing to ask for help with his heart attack and everything. And over in a corner of the cell, there is this, the best way I can describe it is like a giant, like snake-like creature with a giant eyeball. Again, very Lovecraftian, very like look at it and you go insane, like very Call of Cthulhu type deal. And it's like, what will you give me if I help you with this? It's like, I can give you a curse. I can give you something that will give you what you want, but what will you give me in return? And Roger's like, well, what do you want? And he goes, pain, blood, like bad stuff basically. And Roger's like, sure, here, I'm having a heart attack, take that. And the creature like accepts it and it's like, oh, it's good, but it's not enough, I need more. So Roger's like, yes, take whatever you want. And apparently, along with like the pain of the heart attack and everything, that creature takes Veronica's unborn child, which is why she miscarried, and it also takes Ted. Like, that is what it wanted. And it gives Roger this power to curse his son, like the perfect words and everything. So Roger is like completely satisfied with his thing, but he's now lost his unborn child and his actual, like, in the world living son. And Veronica sees all this and she's just horrified. And then Roger comes and gets her, and she confronts him about it, but Roger won't admit that he's made an actual curse against his son. He just won't admit it. He's like, oh, you're blaming me for miscarrying the baby. I did not realize that you were that traumatized, and you're making me a villain, and trying to deflect blame from himself when he knows it's his fault. He knows that happened. He's trying to make her think that, oh, you just had a hallucination. And for the next few sections of the book, like, it talks about how Veronica is trying to get him to admit that he made the curse and to take it back. And Roger is super prideful, and he says, no, I didn't do that to my son. You're mistaken. You think that this hallucination you saw is real and everything, and he won't do it. And then the whole thing, and if you don't want to know how it ends, skip this next section right now. Here, I'll put the timestamp for when you can come back in when we actually talk about my thoughts on the book here. So I'll put that right up here. Okay, so the ending of the book is when Ted arrives at the house. He's not like just fleeting in and out. He's not doing shady stuff. Oh no. He is there, full on there. And Roger and Veronica both, like, Roger cannot see Ted. That is the whole thing. He cannot see Ted. He does not know he is there. And so when Ted comes back, he's chasing Veronica through the house. And when I say through the house, I mean through like several like astral versions of the house. Like, she goes into a closet and the back of the closet isn't there. She keeps running and running and running, and she goes through these various rooms of the house. And she sees these scenes that are symbolic of Roger's past life, of the abuse that he sustained at his drunken father's hands. And she realizes more and more that Roger, even though he's trying not to be like his abusive dad, he's actually very similar to his dad, even though he's trying not to be. And at the very end, when she finally gets through like all the various rooms of the house, all the astral rooms of the house, she winds up back in the actual Belvedere house. And they look outside, she and Roger look outside, and they realize that they have been transported to the area of Afghanistan where Ted was killed, that specific city. They've been transported through time and space to that point. And they look outside the house, and Ted is standing outside at the edge of the property, and he's waiting for Roger. And Veronica says, you have a couple of options. You either reverse the curse, or you go to him, one or the other. And Roger, at this point, he has nothing left to lose, but he still says, no, I will not. I will not reverse this curse. I refuse to admit that I did it. And she's like, you're just like your father. And there's a moment where he almost considers reversing it, but then he's like, no, I'm not going to do it. So then Veronica literally like punches him and like shoves him out the door of the house, locks the door behind him, and says, go to him. Go to Ted now. If you walk in a straight line, he's right there. You go to him. And so she like locks the door on him, and he tries to get it open back up. She doesn't. He turns around, he walks towards Ted, and then everything just goes crazy haywire. Veronica passes out from all of this like psychic feedback. I'm calling it psychic feedback. I'm not sure 100% what it is. But like, she passes out from that, and when she wakes back up, she's back in the normal world, back in the normal time, back in the neighborhood, but Roger isn't there. And she goes looking for him. She goes looking throughout the house. She goes looking outside. She goes looking around the neighborhood. She can't find him anywhere. She tries calling him. Nothing. She can't find him anywhere. So she calls the police. The police conduct an investigation, and they can't find him anywhere. He's just gone. He's just disappeared. He's just nowhere. And she knows deep down that Ted got him, and that he's most likely dead or in the spirit realm, one or the other. But he's not coming back. There is no way Roger's coming back. And so the investigation like kind of turns into a cold case file, and tension wanes, and people stop like thinking about it after a while. But Veronica goes into like this deep depression. She starts drinking. She goes to see a therapist, and that kind of helps a little bit. And she comes up with 3 possible endings for how Roger could have wound up for where he might be right now. And the first one that she came up with was he was actually the guy who was the old man who caused the distraction that caused Ted to be killed in the first place. Like, they had gone back in time, so that is that whole time loop thing where he's the one that caused the explosion that killed his kid. There's a second ending that she comes up with where Roger like goes back to the jail cell and he reverses everything that he did. And then the third ending that she thinks might have happened is he's just wandering in a cold, dark, dry, empty wasteland and trying to find Ted, and he's completely alone. And she thinks the third ending, the one where he's wandering in like this spiritual wasteland, is probably the most likely. But there's no way for her to tell for sure because she's most likely never going to see him again. And so there's the whole speculation and everything. But that's pretty much where the story ends. She stops talking to the guy, to the guy who was the reporter, and she's like, okay, I'm gonna go to bed now. It's taken 2 nights for her to tell him this story. And she's like, okay, I'm gonna go to bed now, and she goes, that's cool, I'll see you later. And the reporter guy, he goes to his room, and his wife and his baby are in their room. He's got a little boy, like infant boy, like maybe 1 year old at the very most. And the little baby starts like crying in the middle of the night. He goes and picks up his son and just like hugs his little boy and is like, that's okay, daddy's here, daddy loves you. And you can only imagine what's going through his mind, like I'm not going to be that father, I'm not going to hurt my son, I'm not going to disconnect from my son that way. And it's kind of a really like scary, like hit you home moment at the very end. So what are my thoughts on House of Windows? It is excellent. It is excellent in terms of writing. Like, the only thing that I would have liked structurally, like the structure of the book, I go by chapters. Like, I used to, when I was a kid, I would just pick up a book and read it cover to cover and I'd be fine. But that was before I had adult responsibilities like cleaning, work, YouTube channel. That was before I had all this stuff that I needed to do. So I like to gauge my reading in terms of chapters. And the book did not have chapters, surprisingly enough. It had part 1, part the middle, interlude, and part the last. And instead of chapters, there were these like little sections that would be like separated by little asterisks, and then type, and then asterisks, and type, asterisks. And sometimes it would be like 2 sentences in a little chunk. Sometimes it'd be like pages and pages. But it really kind of threw off my reading, my reading cadence for a bit. So I would have liked a little bit more structure that way, but it honestly flows a bit better though with like with the structure the way that it was. So ultimately I think it worked. John Langan has a very like classic writer style to his works. That very like classic, it's like if Charles Dickens and if H.P. Lovecraft like got together and like did some sort of ritual to make a really like discombobulated baby. Like, that is how his writing is. It's got that Lovecraftian feel, but it's also got that classic writer feel. And honestly, I love that type of writing so much. I am totally a classics girl when it comes to books. So modern authors, like the modern authors and the modern way of writing, it just doesn't jive well with me. I love like more classic works, and that was something that I really loved with John Langan's work. And as far as like the book itself, and from what I understand, I read like the acknowledgments in the bit in the back where he talks about how he put the book together, and apparently the horror aspect of it with like the father disowning the child and then the child dying, that actually came from a short story that he wrote that was inspired by true life events that happened to one of his friends. And then he added more to it, like with the 9/11 attacks, and kind of like added more to it before it became the finished product that it was. And he took it to a couple of other publishers before it was fully finished, before finally like putting it together in its full form and taking it to the publisher that actually printed it in like first hardcover and then paperback. And I think that was a good move. I think it was good that he went back to something that he had written as like a short story and then said, wait a minute, no, I can make this better. Let me try this one more time. And then cranked out this just beautiful piece of work. I loved it so much. One thing that I really like about John Langan's horror style is you keep the audience interested and you keep feeding them horror throughout the book. There are so many movies and so many books where there's this long introduction, you meet the family, they're moving to a new house, you do this whole long drawn out like introduction thing, and then, oh, there might be something scary over here, there might be something scary over there, but it's not actually anything. And then you just throw everything at the audience at once at the very end and then hope everything's gonna happen in the climax. And then just, like, everything just comes crashing in, like, at the very end of the climax. And I don't like books like that. I get bored with that so easily. Like, if I pick up a horror book, I want to read a horror book. I want to be scared. I want that horror stuff. Otherwise, it's just not gonna do it for me. And John Langan, he feeds you horror, like, throughout the whole book. He gives you a little bit here, he gives you a little bit there. He leaves like a little trail of like horror breadcrumbs that eventually leads you to the loaf of bread that is, bread that is this horror, like all the horror action like in the, like near the end of the book there. And it's just a perfect, just a perfect sprinkling of like all the horror like throughout the whole book, and I feel very, very happy with that. Like, I feel very good. So hats off to you, John Langan. You did a great job. You do a great job with your books. Keep doing what you're doing. So for this, may I recommend Monday? Do I recommend House of Windows? Yes, yes I do. Go ahead and pick it up at your local library. I had turned it in before I did this video, so whoever the publisher was, I'm not 100% sure, but you could probably pick it up at your local library, or you could probably check Amazon. They've got everything there. So thank you all for joining me for this Thoughts from the Couch May I Recommend Monday. If you liked what you saw, if you want more book reviews and things like that, go ahead, click like and subscribe. Let me know in the comments if you got a scary book that you want me to read. I did have somebody say that they wanted me to watch The Wailing for a horror movie review. I will get there, I promise. I've just had a very busy life, so I will get there. But if you have suggestions for books you'd like me to read and look at, and do I recommend them or not, because you don't have the time to read them yourself and you don't want to waste time reading something you don't want to read, let me know in the comments below. Share me around with your friends and family who are also bibliophiles. It's not 100% necessary to like and subscribe and do all that, but it does help out the channel quite a bit. And hopefully we will see you next week for more books, movies, and games about murder, mayhem, and maiming. Bye, everybody!